Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke, and today's guest is Dr. Julie Starr Parker. She is a practicing psychic medium, spirit life coach, and clairvoyant healer. As an assistant professor of psychology in 2004, she also published one of the first dissertations and peer-reviewed journal articles on after-death communication, which is what we'll be talking about today. Julie, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This should be fun.
As a medium and a spirit life coach, I imagine you discovered you were a medium before pretty much everything else, including afterlife communication. Is that true?
Well, I did not really know that I was a medium in the sense of a medium until well after that. So after I got the PhD in psychology and studied transpersonal psychology, and I had a series of events that would indicate, yes, there are mediumship capabilities here, but I did not understand that at the time. Things had to get pretty hairy and scary before I really got it.
Okay. Now, so when you were younger, because I notice many mediums and other intuitives that don't use the term, do report of having psychic phenomena, seeing spirits or feeling spirits when they were young. So you did or you did not have any of that?
When I was young, I had a lot of experiences of what we call clairsentience. So I didn't understand that, of course, until much later in life, what it was. But I could read the energy of other people. So I knew immediately who was a safe person, who wasn't a safe person, who I liked, who I didn't, and had a sense of who they were, even as a child of 5. I had other types of psychic experiences as a child, but when I didn't really start to see spirits or have spirit communication or other types of experiences such as apports. And apports are when objects can materialize or disappear. And you may have talked to people about that. That didn't come till later, until I was 50. So there's something about coming at that age is when I really started to activate. And that's when I started getting training, some pretty intense training in psychic development and doing psychic readings and mediumship. So that's been ongoing for, about 3 years since I started really getting that training.
Training for mediumship skills, from what I'm told, is pretty important. I've talked to a couple of people from the Forever Family Foundation, and there's other organizations as well. So did you study with someone where they certified you or they confirmed your abilities and maybe even tested you, or was it something different?
Yeah, I was trained. Most of my training has been with the International School of Clairvoyance. So Deborah Lynn Katz, this is her school, and she wrote a classic in the field called You Are Psychic. And that's one way that I found her, but was also recommended by another medium to work with her. So yes, I do have a certification from her, as I have done all of her classes and have repeated them several times. And now I'm also a facilitator for her other students for practice mediumship. So
were you tested? Do they give you blind readings and then basically quiz the sitter afterwards, or did that not take place?
No, that doesn't take place with her school, no. But these are live classes. And, at some point I may do something like that, but at this point I don't feel moved to do that.
Well, I think in your case, if you've had enough evidential events, then that's your confirmation. At least that's what I've been told. So can you give us an example of something like that with one of your clients or one of your sitters where you offered some information which did confirm something for them?
In terms of a client, I will never forget this one. This was pretty interesting. So we're on Zoom and she's asking me about her mother. Can you connect with my mother who's passed away? So I started to tune in and I saw a woman. I started to describe this woman. And she said, "Oh, wait a minute. That's the mother who raised me, and I have a picture of her. You're describing her picture." So I'm describing her picture down to the striped 70s looking pants that she was wearing. And she said, "That's not my deceased mother." So I tune in to the deceased mother and I start describing her. So I'm physically describing her. And then this person is asking me, well, she had a special name that she would call me. Can you give me that name? I'm like, yeah, that's asking a lot because I don't hear that well when I'm in a session. I hear very well when I'm in deep trance states, which does not involve being in a session. I said, so I'm not even going to go there, but I will tell you this. And so I started giving her information that confirmed a health problem that she had, that I had no way of knowing. It's a health problem that her mother was concerned about. And then this is when it got interesting. She apparently was internally asking her mother questions. And then I just started talking, just whatever was coming out, it just started coming out. And when we got to the end of that, she said, you just answered every single question that I just asked my mom. And one of them was related to that name. I said, I can't hear the name, but it's 2 syllables and related to something else. So that was a pretty good one.
Probably not the easiest thing in the world to do. I've been told that any medium, it doesn't matter how good they are, they can't guarantee results for everybody, because if the spirit does not really want to come through, or sometimes they've not been past that long and they don't really know how to communicate, the sitter is not always going to get the answers that they're looking for.
That's very true. Right. And they will only give the information that they want to give. So there's a limited window, and that connection needs to be maintained, and it's a very delicate connection. So you can do a psychic reading and you can read someone and you can tune in psychically, but to have that true communication is a very delicate process and a little bit of time, and there's certain things they want to get through. So we're after the evidence so that we know who it is that we're talking to, which is not the easiest thing in the world either. But then what is it that's relevant, that's going to be meaningful to the sitter? And the sitter may understand what's coming out, but I, the medium, I don't even know what I'm talking about, but it could be relevant to the sitter.
But it doesn't matter if it's relevant to you or not. If the sitter recognizes it as something that's relevant to them, that's all that matters, right?
Right, that's all that matters, and that's what happens time and time again.
Excellent. It's very good to hear, because I have this discussion a lot because people start asking about mediums because people are naturally skeptical, which I think they should be. What I tell them is that you should read a book called The Medium Explosion, written by Robert Ginsburg, who actually founded the Forever Family Foundation. And what they do is they test mediums. I think it's 4 or 5 blind readings in a row, and then they actually quiz the sitter afterwards. And he told me that only about 15% actually get certified. And the reason I know that's true is because before I interviewed him, I interviewed a woman named Siri Burnson, who came from that organization. She told me the same exact thing. And she said, you should also interview Bob. He's going to tell you a lot of what I'm telling you. So that handbook, it's basically like a cautionary guide so they don't get duped, because unfortunately there are people that are either outright frauds or worse. Their intentions are good, but they're just not trained.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important for people to know that. So the question about psychics and mediums, there is a difference.
Yes.
As far as I can tell, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. In other words, not all psychics can speak with the dead. Do you find the same thing?
I've heard the same thing, and I believe that that is true.
Right.
And I also believe a lot of what people think is mediumship are people tuning in psychically. So all the information is there in your memories, in your aura. And that in itself is pretty amazing to be able to do that. And so they're gleaning information that's already stored in your aura or in your mind, and they're not really having this communication with the spirit.
So in other words, you're saying a psychic might be able to glean that information from your aura, from your energy, but may not be communicating with the spirit.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And then it can be tricky too in terms of knowing and understanding yourself and your mediumship enough to know when you are communicating with the spirit versus when you are picking up things psychically.
Right. And your contention is there's probably a fair percentage out there that they think they're communicating with spirit, someone's deceased loved one, but are actually really just picking up the information from the sitter.
Yes.
That could be kind of confusing for, I think, a lot of us.
Can be confusing for the medium, for the developing medium, but it just takes practice and understanding your own psychic abilities.
Are there any guidelines for us to be able to tell if someone's actually communicating with a spirit or if they're just picking that information up from us?
I will give you an example of how I could tell. Okay, so in practicing and working with other mediums and students, I worked with a medium once and I asked her to tune into my grandmother. So my grandmother, I never actually knew her in life, but I communicate with her since she's died, because I was 3 years old when she died, and she's, a guide for me. And so this medium, she just started just skimming off the top all this, like this and that and that and that. Do you understand? Do you understand this? Do you understand that? And I'm like, well, yeah, these are things that are relevant and true about my grandmother. But she didn't give me any information that was relevant in terms of the work I had been doing with my grandmother, the interactions I've had with my grandmother, things that my grandmother knew were going in my life, to show that she was really talking to my grandmother, because what I needed and wanted was that validation from my grandmother and any messages she had about my current life circumstances and the challenges that I was going through. So none of that came out. It was just fact this, fact that, just little details. But I didn't get that feeling. There's a feeling that goes with it. When you know you're connecting, you can feel it and you know it. And the sitter should be able to feel it and know it, that, wow, okay, now this was something really useful that came out and helpful, and I can feel that, and I know that.
It's a really good point. And it seems to me that as an aspiring sitter, like someone who wants to make contact with a relative or a friend that passed, they need to do research too. They need to prepare, don't you think?
I do. And also there's this element of coming in with an open mind and an open heart. And also the understanding that when you are sitting with a medium, it is a delicate process. And it's almost like a game of charades, because the way the communications can come in symbols and pictures, there's also just that feeling component of it, depending on what your strengths are. If the medium is using clairsentience or clairvoyance or what they're hearing. And so they're bringing this out and trying to bring it out in a way that the sitter can understand. So the sitter is going to hear things that may not resonate in the moment, but later they're like, oh, right, now I know what that means. So do your research, but also come in with an open heart and an open mind. Take really good notes if the session is not recorded, because you may understand things later that you didn't understand at the moment. And I'll give you an example of how that happened with me. And
very good point. Yep.
Yeah.
Something that comes up later, right? Because you don't understand at the moment. I think one example I can think of is someone I interviewed a while back had a young woman who was about to get married, and she was trying to, I think, get in touch with her grandmother. Her grandmother's passed. Kept talking about a blue dress. And that meant nothing. Didn't mean anything to her at the time. But weeks later, right before she got married, someone gave her a box. And in the box was a blue dress. So that's probably a really good example of evidential info that does not come out right away, which pretty much rules out the possibility of someone just reading your mind, right?
Right. I have an example of that with a blue dress. Do you want to hear it?
Of course.
The blue dress. Okay, so this was in the beginning when I was starting to see spirits, because I can see spirits with my eyes. And all of this started, maybe about 5 years ago, where I'm seeing all these energies and these colors and these spirits and these orbs. And it's, it can be a little overwhelming. Well, I had not come out about it with any of my friends at that time. So I was in the office where I teach, at the university, and I'm talking to my dean, and we're having this conversation, and I was seeing this orb fly around her office and around her. And so while we're talking, I'm like, okay, I'm going to tune in a minute into this orb. And I immediately got it was her mother. Like, this is her mother. And I said, I was telling her internally, give me some kind of piece of evidence for my friend that this is really you. And if I tell her about this. So she showed me a blue dress. And I said, okay, great. And then we were talking. So I lost the connection and the orb went away. For 2 weeks, I was getting like somebody's knocking on my aura. Somebody is like nagging me. You've got to tell Jen. You've got to tell Jen. I'm hearing these voices. You've got to tell her. You've got to tell her. So I said, okay, I will tell her. So I told her, I said, for the past several years, I've been seeing spirits. And she's like, what? And I actually saw one 2 weeks ago in your office. Do you want to hear about it? And she said, yeah, sure. Now, this is taking a lot of courage from me to come out like this to my dean about.
Yeah, good point. Oh, yeah, this isn't just like, the friend next door.
Yeah. I consider her a friend, but she's also my boss, and it is a Baptist university. So, it just comes with all of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And I said, okay, I saw this orb. I tuned in. She said, it's your mom. And she showed me a blue dress. And she said, oh, that's really interesting because, I never hear from my mom. So then I find out that, she believes in this. And, she's had these after-death communication experiences with other relatives, but never did with her mother. And this always bothered her. And I said, well, what does the blue dress mean? And she said, I don't know what the blue dress means. Well, about a week later, she texted me. Oh, I know what the blue dress means. Her daughter and her went to buy a prom dress, and the dress they bought was a blue dress. And I said, there you go. It just goes to show your mom is with you, and she's with you and your daughter when you're looking for this prom dress. And this is what she was telling us. So that was really neat.
Yeah, very cool. A good thing for someone to discover, for the sitter and for that person that's asking that question. So lots of questions that I want to ask you. We can talk about the research or whatever you prefer. Because I wanted to know, how did you become a spirit life coach, or was that after the research work that you did?
Oh, that was well after the research, because after I did the research, this was in the course of my dissertation. And the dissertation was on after-death communication experiences and adaptive outcomes of grief. And so this filled a gap in the research, and I actually was able to write an academic article on that and get it published in Omega Journal Death of Dying. Well, that's when I went into teaching. So I went to the community colleges and I started teaching psychology, as a full-time instructor. And then I went into the university and started teaching in the university. Well, these are the things you can't really talk about when you're teaching Western psychology and traditional psychology. You can't talk about them too much, even though this was based on therapy and how to do therapy with a grieving person who is reporting these types of communication experiences. So I didn't do a lot of talking about things like that. I taught and I'm still teaching part-time online, but I've been teaching for 18 years. So during the pandemic, my full-time position was cut due to low enrollment. And now the school is really going downhill. It looks like it's about to close probably in the next year or so. So I lost it, and I said, I've got to completely change up what I'm doing. So this is when I started doing the intuitive life coaching or the spirit life coaching. And transpersonal psychology is a subfield of psychology that looks beyond just your behavior and your mind and your material self. It's looking at the person as having an aspect of themselves that goes beyond that. So this is our connection to something greater than ourselves. And this is part of our psychology. So you could call it like a spiritual psychology. It's really great. I have all of this background, and then I have all this background teaching positive psychology and interventions for helping people to increase their well-being. And then I also have the psychic part. And honestly, I've been doing this with students for years because students love to come see me and sit in my office and talk with me about some of the problems and the challenges they're having. And I totally approach this from an intuitive standpoint. And they'll say, gosh, Dr. Parker, how did you know that? I'm like, it doesn't matter how I know that. But, here you go. So I'm giving them guidance that's also intuitively based. So it just makes sense for me to offer that.
So with the research, right, you wrote the paper, you wrote the dissertation. What were some of the experiences that the research participants actually offered?
They were varied, and some were quite interesting. Some of the ones that stand out to me were like the full-blown apparitions. One of them was a man, and he's active in the church, and he has the traditional Christian background, and the thought of like after-death communications or seeing apparitions would be like of the devil. So, and this is, 20 years ago when I was doing this research. He was very close with a young couple, teenage couples, her and her boyfriend. They were part of like the group in the church, and they would do things together and have adventures together. And the boy was killed. He was killed in a drunk driving accident. 5 years later to the day, his girlfriend was killed by a drunk driver. So this man was very close with these kids. He loved these kids. And he was having a difficult time with the grief process around that. Well, he said that one day he was just sitting in his chair, reading the newspaper, not doing much of anything. And he looked up, and there she was. She was sitting in the chair across from him. He said it was like he could reach out and touch her. She looked 3D, looked just like a regular person sitting there, and she had the most beautiful smile on her face. And what was different about it was he could see like this cloudiness, mist behind her. And then he was getting ready. He was like so excited to see her. And he was getting ready to say, how are you? And she disappeared. And so when she disappeared, he got up and he looked at the chair to see, are there indentations there? Because she looked that real. Is there indentations there? Anything in the blanket behind it? Nothing. There was nothing there. So after the experience, he had this sense of calm and peace come over him. It helped him really to kind of get through that hump in the grief process, because then he knew that this is real, that there really is a life after death, and of course it solidified some of his spiritual beliefs, but it also led him down a path where he developed this group to give kids rides at night so that they don't have to worry about kids getting killed by drunk drivers. So it just led to so many different things.
The grief aspect is very important. One of the things I noticed about the Forever Family Foundation is they have grief retreats. One of the things we're trying to do is basically provide some kind of confirmation that there is an afterlife, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with treating grief, because I think the point of your work is to help people with the grieving process. It doesn't cure it 100%, but it does have an impact, all right?
It can have a huge impact. It can have an impact for the positive. It can lead to adaptive outcomes, and what current positive psychologists will even call post-traumatic growth can stem from having these experiences when they're within the context of a belief system where they can assimilate it. Now, there are people who don't believe in an afterlife. They don't have spiritual beliefs, and I interviewed a couple of those who had these experiences. And what they had to do was make an accommodation in the way they think about things. How do I accept this experience and not call myself crazy? And what those people did was they then started to change their belief system about life after death. And it opened up a spiritual world for them they never knew existed. And then there are those who have negative experiences. So I had this come up in my research as well. And that can be directly attributed to the type of grief process a person was having and the relationship that they have with the person who had died. And at least this was the case for this particular person, which makes sense.
Which could be kind of frightening, is what you're saying.
It was frightening, and it actually occurred in what we call a sleep paralysis context. So she had that sleep paralysis, and it was right after her grandmother's funeral. And her grandmother was there, but there was the second sinister presence that was there as well. And so at that time, she did not know how to accommodate that or assimilate that. Is this associated with my grandmother, who I had this ambivalent relationship with to begin with? Or is this my grandmother protecting me from something dark that has come in? And so at that time, she had not resolved that for herself yet.
A second sinister presence. I think this is a good opportunity to start talking about spirit guides, how you work as a medium, because protection from these types of entities is obviously something on your mind. Every medium I've talked to, any intuitive that has any contact with the spirit world, will tell anyone who's willing to listen that protection is really, really important. So when you're about to do a session, do you call on spirit guides or your spirit team or something like that to ensure only that of the highest light comes through? Or how do you do that?
Every single time. It is so important. And I've had minimal problems in the context of a sitting with anything dark. The problems that I've had with dark forces come personally, and they come at night, and they come when I am in bed. And I could do a whole nother interview with you.
That could be the part two.
I have a lot to tell about that, and apparently I'm in some big training with spirit guides on how to handle that and how to deal with that. So let me just say, okay, and I think I'm going off the question. When it comes to dark forces and it comes to spirit guides, and I'm probably going to be offering a course on this pretty soon. When it comes to spirit guides and you're developing your psychic abilities, everybody is psychic. Everybody has psychic abilities. It's how far have you progressed in your psychic abilities? Are you accepting them? Are you developing them? Because yes, psychic abilities are something that needs to be developed. It's a skill like anything else, like painting a picture. Now you could paint a picture of a person. Playing a guitar. It takes practice. Now, when you dive into this world and you start trying to open up those abilities and communicate with guides and communicate with spirits, you've got to be careful because there are dark forces and there are what I call dark light beings and false light beings who will pose as a spirit guide. But that's not what they are. That's not what they are. So to go into this naively is a big mistake. And this is where it helps to have training before you start diving into this. And even with the training, as I am a walking testament for, these things can become quite the nuisance. And then you have to learn discernment. Okay, are you of the light? Are you not of the light? Are you some negative ET? And yes, I will bring ETs in because the ETs are starting to communicate with me now too. There are so many different types of beings. It's like I'm looking outside my window and I can see the reflections of bugs flying around. There are so many different types of bugs. There are so many different types of dark beings. And then there are many, many types of benevolent beings. And you have spirit guides. Yeah, but they're not necessarily going to protect you from everything, especially if you are not calling them in.
What about if you call them every day and ask them to protect you?
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. Yeah.
All right.
It doesn't mean that they are just going to cover you up in a blanket and keep you completely safe and secure, because they also want you to grow up. And they want you to grow up and to be able to protect yourself and to be able to discern yourself. So they're not going to do it all for you. there is something called tough love, and that's certainly a training that they have put me through.
Very good point. I like that. The dark beings, that's a discussion for another day, but it's a discussion we will have. I did want to ask about this since we're talking about spirit guides and how you work with them within a session. Does your work at any time give you any insight into past lives? And if so, at the life in between life space, does this ever come up?
Yeah, past lives certainly come up. I have spirits and spirit guides talking to me every single night and morning when I'm waking up. And I have like 25 books of documentation of things that come out of that, including predictions and world events. And I have a completely different website that is dedicated to that. That could be a whole different interview as well.
I have to ask one question, though. I don't know if you're allowed to answer this, but who is going to win the next presidential election?
Nobody has given me any information on that yet.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
But I knew Donald Trump was going to win last time. But they have told me some things about Donald Trump that I have documented. And so I've gotten a lot about Donald Trump and many things that have been coming true about Donald Trump.
I guess we'll talk about that after I shut the tape off. Or if you feel it's relevant, we could talk about it. But
I think all of it's relevant.
And it is, because that could be part of a larger conversation, because in these discussions with intuitives, with mediums, empaths, or whatever descriptor that they use, because not everybody likes to use the term medium, a lot of discussions do turn to things like ascension and moving from 3D to 5D, moving out of the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, and otherwise raising our vibration. And I'm guessing that what's going on in the political world, or is a reflection of what's going on with the struggle, between those two dimensions.
It's a reflection of the struggle between those two dimensions. It's also a reflection of the battle between light and dark.
Biden, I believe, uses jargon like battle for the soul of America. It's not that far off the mark, because I've noticed that when people start talking about spirit guides, eventually the conversations do offer insight into past lives, because I think we're supposed to hopefully learn from it and hopefully not repeat some of the same mistakes. So you've had experience with that, but what about the space in between incarnations, which is called life between lives?
I do Akashic records sometimes, and that will come up, and soul contracts will come up. My most immediate knowing when it comes to life between lives has been my own regression experiences with life between lives. And I think the best way to experience life between lives is by doing your own hypnosis, your own trance, your own regression, with someone else to guide you is very helpful. But also, I get these nightly downloads, and I've had communications and visuals and sounds and words and songs that have pointed to lifetimes that are affecting me now. And also I've had them hold up a contract, because, there's certain things that I'm like, I don't know that I signed up for this. I don't know that I want to be doing this. This is really challenging, and this is really scary. And this is, what I'm talking about, the battles with the dark forces and the things that I've been experiencing that I never knew were possible. I never knew were possible. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even, some of the things I'm experiencing now, I would say, you know what? Maybe you need to see a therapist. I don't know that I understand this. Well, I know that I do not have a psychological disorder. And I know that I am having some extreme psychic experiences and extreme experiences with interdimensional beings and spirits. And I'm saying, I didn't sign up for this, and I don't know that I want this. So then they hold up a contract. And I'm like,
I know that's not supposed to be
I
funny.
will burn that contract.
I'm imagining somebody holding up a contract and me saying, I don't remember signing up for that.
That's exactly what I said. I don't remember signing up for that, and I'm going to burn it. In so many terms I would say that. So this has occurred a few times. But now I'm starting to accept the reality and accept that this is part of my purpose, and that this is leading to something, and this is going to be me helping other people with similar problems.
What about breaking a soul contract? Are there instances where breaking a soul contract is acceptable because you've learned lessons, as well as it's not acceptable because you're not learning the lesson?
Well, Johnny, I'm going to say this. I've heard people say that. I've read about it in books. I have even done some pretty powerful Akashic records clearings for myself. I've worked with other people who really were not that effective, and it didn't work. It didn't work. I don't know if that's really a thing, because I have tried so hard to break a contract and have not been successful on it until I've come to a point of acceptance, because I see that there is a bigger plan and a bigger purpose, and there's a reason for it. And it's not a contract that apparently my soul wants to break. This is part of my experience. Okay, and I have seen this with a few other people too, but I can speak most directly about my own experience. We do have part of our consciousness, our soul, that exists beyond our conscious awareness, that is on the astral plane, that is dealing with these entities, that's doing things that we don't even know what we're doing. And then you have the conscious ego self. So when a lot of this started with me, especially the scary stuff and the entity attacks, and I sent you some pictures, I don't know if you were able to see them, with the orbs and the man that is behind me, the spirit man that's behind me, and the burns on my back.
I haven't looked at them yet, but I will.
That will be good for us to talk about in another interview.
Do you think with the growing popularity, or at least the awareness of past life regression and life between lives regression therapy, do you think that's going to eventually come into the mainstream?
I think eventually it will be mainstream, but I don't know if it will be mainstream in our lifetime.
Probably not. Okay. But I think it's a good way for people to learn. If they're listening to content like this, they're saying, great, how do I do this? And I think probably the most efficient way is to look into doing some of those sessions.
And find a good transpersonal hypnotherapist. So
Really?
There are hypnotherapists who are transpersonal hypnotherapists and past life regression hypnotherapists. And it can be quite enlightening. And I think the value of doing that kind of work is that you experientially understand that you are more than just this body and this brain and this mind, and that when you die, your body dies, but you continue to exist, that you are an eternal being. And people can tell you that, you can read about it, and you can form a belief about it. And it's the same with spirits and spirit communication and being able to see spirits and entity attacks and some of these other things that I'm telling you about. Believing it is one thing. Knowing it is another. And the best way to know it is by having your own experiences. And this is where practitioners can help people and guide people. But again, like you said, do your research, feel people out, ask them questions.
I liked what you said about we are more than just these bodies. I've been told, I don't know how many times, who you really are is not Johnny Burke or Julie Parker or anyone else for that matter, because our essence is just so much bigger than that. And I'll end on this note. As the immortal John Lennon said, I don't believe in death. It's like getting out of one car and getting into another. I thought that was perfect.
I think that's perfect.
Yep. To be continued. Julie, thanks for joining us today. How can our listeners learn more about you in the meantime?
My website is juliestarrparker.com, and that's Starr with 2 R's, Starr. And my Instagram handle is juliestarr33.
I will put that in the show notes in the transcript as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. For more info, please go to closertovenus.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.